Daddy killed mommy for $1 million. Am I next? The chilling case of Hailey Bertolet's fight for survival. A little girl looked at the man she trusted more than anyone in the world, her own father. To her, he was the perfect dad. The man who cooked her meals, protected her, watched over her, and made sure she was always safe. But years later, that same little girl would discover a horrifying truth. This is Harold Henthorn. On the surface, he appeared to be a devoted husband and a loving father. He was the kind of person people trusted, a man who seemed completely dedicated to his family. But on the day his wife, Toni Henthorn, was dying, Harold made a phone call that would eventually raise terrifying questions. A 911 call had just ended. Harold claimed he had hung up because his phone battery was dying. But investigators would later discover that the reason behind that decision was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Only 5 hours before that emergency call, Harold and Toni were living what looked like a perfect family life. They lived in Colorado with their 7-year-old daughter, Hailey. To friends and relatives, Harold appeared to be an incredibly involved father. He woke up with Hailey every morning. He spent evenings with her. He cooked meals, took care of her, and even installed security cameras around the house to make sure his daughter was safe. People believed he was the ultimate protective father. In fact, many noticed something unusual. Harold seemed to spend more time with Hailey than he did with his own wife. And for Hailey, her father was everything. She adored him. She trusted him completely. To a 7-year-old girl, her father was the person who would always protect her. The person who could never hurt her. But on September 29, 2012, everything Hailey believed about her family would begin to collapse. That day, her mother fell to her death during what was described as a hiking accident. Suddenly, Hailey was left alone with her father. She was told it was a tragic accident, an unimaginable loss that no one could have prevented. But behind the scenes, there were disturbing details that had not yet been uncovered. Because Toni was not Harold's first wife. And her death was not the first tragedy connected to him. Years earlier, Harold's first wife had also died under suspicious circumstances. And investigators would later discover another shocking detail. Harold had recently purchased a $1 million life insurance policy on his own daughter, Hailey. A little girl who had already lost her mother was now unknowingly at the center of a horrifying mystery. The truth behind Toni's death might have remained hidden forever if it were not for one person, Hailey's uncle, Barry Bertolet. Barry was determined to find out what really happened to his sister. And as the investigation unfolded, he may have become the only person standing between Hailey and a terrible fate. It was September 29, 2012. A normal Saturday afternoon in Tupelo, Mississippi. For Barry Bertolet, life seemed ordinary. Barry was a successful cardiologist, a devoted father, and someone who valued his large, close-knit family. Among the people closest to him was his younger sister, Toni. Even though Toni lived hundreds of miles away in Colorado with her husband Harold and their daughter Hailey, the siblings remained connected. So when Barry received an unexpected phone call from his brother-in-law, Harold, he answered without hesitation. At first, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. But the moment Barry picked up the phone, he heard something that instantly made his heart sink. A scream. A loud, desperate, high-pitched scream coming through the phone. Barry later described the moment. I answered the phone and there's this high-pitched scream that's coming across the phone. Then he heard Harold's voice. But Harold did not sound like someone calmly explaining an accident. He sounded frantic, confused, almost as if he was trying to communicate something without actually saying it. Harold repeatedly told Barry, "Barry, go look at your cell phone." He kept saying he could not talk right now. He kept insisting Barry needed to check his phone. Barry was confused. What had happened? Why wasn't Harold explaining? Why was he telling him to look at his phone instead? Before Barry could ask any questions, the call suddenly ended. Harold had hung up. And at that moment, Barry had no idea that this strange phone call would become the beginning of a shocking investigation, one that would uncover secrets, suspicious deaths, and a terrifying question. Was Hailey really safe with the person she trusted most? Harold Henthorn's sister-in-law is away on a weekend trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, celebrating what should have been a special milestone, her 12th wedding anniversary with Harold. Meanwhile, their young daughter, Haley, is back home under the care of a babysitter. For a couple who loved the outdoors, hiking, and spending time surrounded by nature, the mountains seemed like the perfect escape. A quiet getaway. A chance to enjoy each other's company away from everyday life. Everything appeared to be going exactly as planned. Until suddenly, everything changed. Barry, Toni's brother, receives an urgent message from Harold. Confused by the panic in Harold's words, Barry immediately grabs his phone, trying to understand what happened. The message reads, "Barry, urgent. Toni is injured. Fall from rock. She has been in a critical accident." The message is short. There are very few details. Harold provides almost no explanation about what happened or how serious Toni's condition really is. But to Barry, the lack of information makes the situation even more frightening. His sister is hurt. She is somewhere deep in the mountains, far away from immediate medical help. And now Harold is turning to him for guidance. Barry knows that his medical experience may be the only thing that can help Toni in those critical moments. He may have to guide Harold through a life-or-death situation from miles away. Then Harold sends another update. He gives Barry Toni's vital signs. Pulse of 60 and respirations of 5. At first, Barry tries to stay hopeful. A pulse of 60 suggests that Toni's heart is still beating. He wants to believe she is strong enough to survive this. "I'm optimistic at this point," Barry later explains. "She's a strong lady." But then more messages begin coming in, one after another. And with every new message, Barry starts to realize this is not just a simple accident. Toni's condition is getting worse, and it is happening quickly. Harold tells him that Toni now needs CPR. For Barry, those words change everything. The fact that CPR is necessary means Toni's body is no longer functioning normally. She is struggling to breathe, and her heart may no longer be responding the way it should. That tells me Toni has lost her ability to breathe, and her heart is no longer getting the signal to beat, Barry explains. Either one of those situations is critical, but both together are horrible. For a brother, there is no worse feeling than knowing someone you love is in danger and you cannot physically be there. Barry feels helpless. He is supposed to be the person protecting his sister, the person who should be by her side when she needs him most. But instead, he is hundreds of miles away, trying to help through a phone. Being the big brother and supposed to take care of your sister, you can't do it. It's a bad feeling. I needed to be there for my sister. But I couldn't. Before continuing with this story, we'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, ZocDoc. Sponsors help us continue sharing powerful stories and bringing important experiences to audiences everywhere. At Unseen, there is always a long list of things demanding our attention, and we understand that taking care of your health is often pushed aside. Between busy schedules, complicated systems, and endless calls with doctors' offices, making an appointment can feel exhausting. It takes time. It creates stress. And sometimes, it feels easier to ignore it than deal with it. But prioritizing your health should not have to be overwhelming. The excuses can be endless. You tell yourself you'll make the appointment later. You convince yourself it can wait a little longer. But then, when you finally decide to take action, you discover that the next available appointment is still weeks or even months away. And when it comes to your health, waiting isn't always an option. That's exactly why ZocDoc has made the process easier, completely free. Instead of spending hours searching, making calls, and trying to find a doctor who fits your schedule, ZocDoc puts everything in one place. You simply sign in, choose the type of doctor you need, and instantly see available appointment times. With just one click, you can find openings that work for you. Many appointments are available within 24 to 72 hours, and in some cases, you can even get seen the same day. It's designed for people with busy lives, unpredictable schedules, and no time to waste. And if you're unsure which doctor is right for you, ZocDoc's extensive directory includes reviews from real patients, helping you make a more informed decision. Don't let a busy schedule become the reason you ignore your health. Visit zocdoc.com/unseen to get started and finally check that appointment off your list. If there's something you've been putting off, even something small, Take this as your reminder to stop waiting and take that first step. A huge thank you to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's return to Haley's story. As Barry waits for more information from Harold, he realizes he can't sit in silence. He begins calling the rest of Toni's family, her mother, her father, and other loved ones, telling them that something serious has happened. But at that moment, nobody knows the full story. Nobody has answers. All they know is that something terrible has happened on what was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday. A normal weekend has suddenly turned into a nightmare for the Bertolet family. I told them that Toni had been in an accident, Barry later recalled. There was an ongoing rescue attempt, but the vital signs I was hearing about, it didn't look good. Barry waits anxiously, hoping for a different outcome. Hoping for good news. Hoping that somehow Toni will survive. But as the minutes pass, the uncertainty becomes unbearable. Minutes turn into hours. Then, finally, Barry receives the message no family member ever wants to see. A text from Harold. Harold had texted me and said that she's gone. And in that moment, Barry knew. Toni was gone. The reality was impossible to accept. It's hard to believe something like that could happen to someone you know, someone you love, Barry said. That's my sister. For the Bertolet family, those words changed everything. She's gone. Barry said those were the worst 2 words he had ever heard in his life. And as a brother and a father, one thought continued to haunt him. I wasn't there to protect her. A feeling that would stay with him forever. Barry had lost his little sister. Toni's parents had lost their daughter. And 7-year-old Haley had lost her mother. In just a few hours, their entire world had changed. Earlier that same day, everything seemed normal. It was simply a weekend trip. A celebration. A moment that was supposed to create happy memories. But now, they were being told Toni had died in a tragic fall. From the outside, that was exactly what it appeared to be. A devastating accident. A heartbreaking tragedy. The kind of unimaginable loss that no family could ever truly prepare for. In the aftermath of Toni's sudden death, everyone around her is struggling to process the unimaginable loss. Her family and friends are overwhelmed with grief, trying to understand how life could possibly continue without her. They are searching for answers, trying to find a way to move forward through the pain. But there is one person who appears to be handling the tragedy in a completely different way, Toni's husband, Harold. While everyone else is mourning, Harold seems determined to push forward. And what happens next begins to raise questions about his behavior. Within just 24 hours of Toni's death, a complete memorial page for her is already live on the funeral home's website. It is not a simple announcement. The page is filled with carefully selected photographs, a detailed biography, and a timeline describing Toni's life, memories, and accomplishments. But what makes it even more unusual is that every single detail was created and published by Harold himself. He takes complete control of arranging Toni's funeral, handling every part of the process personally. The cremation is organized, the date is finalized, and the only thing remaining is informing Toni's loved ones. Just 48 hours after his wife's death, Harold reveals that he has already planned the entire memorial service. He has created a tribute video. He has chosen the music. He has even contacted the people who will perform the songs. Every detail appears to have already been decided. One person observing this behavior struggles to understand it. He says, I kept thinking, if this was my wife who had died, I would be completely broken. I would be an emotional wreck. I can't imagine being able to sit there and organize an entire funeral with this much detail so quickly. 5 days after Toni's death, hundreds of people gather to attend her memorial service. The purpose of the day is simple, to honor and remember Toni Henthorn. The room is filled with sadness. Family members and friends are grieving, sharing memories, and trying to say goodbye to someone they loved. But then they notice Harold. While everyone around him is overwhelmed with emotion, Harold appears strangely disconnected from the moment. He is standing with a few friends, shaking hands, laughing, and casually talking about things like golf. To those watching, it feels almost as if Harold is not attending a funeral for his wife, but hosting a social gathering. The people who expected to see a devastated husband see something completely different. Instead of finding someone consumed by grief, they find someone who appears calm, comfortable, and detached. For Toni's brother Barry and the rest of the family, Harold's behavior feels unusual. He is friendly. He is talkative. He is polite and engaging. But what Barry notices most is the dramatic difference between Harold and his 7-year-old niece, Haley. While Harold seems almost unaffected, Haley is the complete opposite. The young girl barely speaks. She shows almost no emotion. She does not cry. She appears withdrawn, almost as if she is afraid to express what she is feeling. And that contrast begins to bother Barry. Something about the situation does not feel right. There is no clear evidence. No proof. No undeniable explanation. But there is a feeling, a strong instinct that something deeper may be happening beneath the surface. Barry and his family begin to believe they need to pay closer attention. They decide to start documenting what they see, recording details and behaviors that seem unusual. In the days that follow, Barry continues replaying the events of the night Toni died, especially the frantic messages he received from Harold. At the time, everyone believed Toni's death was a heartbreaking accident, a tragic fall during what was supposed to be a romantic anniversary getaway. But as Barry thinks back on everything that happened, questions begin to surface. And the more he remembers, the more he wonders if Toni's death was really the accident everyone believed it was. He cannot escape the growing feeling that something about the story does not add up. The more Barry thinks about what happened, the more uneasy he becomes. Something about Toni's death on that mountain continues to bother him, and he cannot simply accept it as a tragic accident. Quietly, Barry begins sharing his concerns with other members of the family, hoping they can help him understand what really happened during Toni and Harold's weekend trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. But as the conversations continue, a disturbing realization begins to surface. Barry is not the only person who feels that something is wrong. Other family members begin questioning the details surrounding Toni's death, noticing things that do not quite make sense. Determined to find answers, Barry starts pressing law enforcement for a deeper investigation. He urges police to take another look at what happened on that mountain that night and reconsider the events leading up to Toni's fatal fall. With the family's growing suspicions in mind, investigators begin examining Harold's 911 call from the night Toni died. On Saturday, September 29th, Toni and Harold were supposed to be celebrating their 12th wedding anniversary. The trip was meant to be a romantic escape, a carefully planned weekend getaway created by Harold, giving the couple time alone together in the beautiful mountains of Colorado. But instead of becoming a celebration of their marriage, the trip ended in unimaginable tragedy. According to Harold's account, the couple was hiking when Toni suddenly slipped near the edge of a cliff and fell nearly 140 feet below. Harold described the moment as a terrifying accident, claiming he watched helplessly as his wife fell and was left fighting for her life. During the 911 call, Harold appears frightened and overwhelmed. His voice suggests panic and urgency as he asks for help. He repeatedly tries to get emergency assistance, even requesting that a helicopter be sent to rescue Toni as quickly as possible. As darkness covered the mountain, Harold remained at the scene waiting for help to arrive. Hours later, around 8 p.m., a park ranger finally reached them. Toni was carefully removed from the mountain and rushed to the hospital, but sadly, by that point, it was already too late. After listening to the 911 call and reviewing the initial details, everything appeared to point toward a heartbreaking accident. It seemed Harold had done everything possible to save his wife, and the unusual behavior he displayed after Toni's death could simply have been the actions of a grieving husband struggling to process an unimaginable loss. Wanting to support their family and protect Toni's daughter, the Bertolet family chose to stand by Harold and Haley. They tried to move forward together, believing they were helping a young child cope with losing her mother. Harold was now a single father raising a little girl who was also trying to understand life without Toni. Toni's family made every effort to remain involved in Haley's life. They stayed close, visited as often as they could, and tried to provide stability, love, and support during such a painful time. But as the months passed, they began noticing a troubling change. Harold started returning their calls less frequently. Arranging visits became more difficult. Slowly, the time they were able to spend with Haley became smaller and smaller. From the outside, Harold appeared to be a devoted father, loving, protective, and completely focused on caring for his daughter. He looked like someone doing everything possible to help Haley heal after losing her mother. But what the family did not know was that behind closed doors, a much darker reality was beginning to emerge. Harold's behavior toward Haley becomes increasingly concerning as time passes. He keeps an intense and almost constant watch over his young daughter, creating a world where she has very little freedom. Every part of her daily life appears to require his approval. He sets strict rules about what she can do, where she can go, and how she should behave. Nothing seems to happen without his supervision. Even simple things that most children her age would do independently are controlled by Harold. He monitors her routines closely, even deciding when she can get a drink of water. But perhaps the most disturbing detail is that Harold installs a baby monitor inside Haley's bedroom, despite the fact that she is already 7 years old. To many people, this level of monitoring feels less like normal parenting and more like an unhealthy need for control. Those close to the situation describe Harold's relationship with Haley as something that borders on obsession. His relationship with Haley was almost to a point of obsession. The people around him are left wondering what his true intentions are. We were on bated breath. What's he gonna do with her? From Harold's point of view, Toni's family appears to be standing beside him. He believes they support him and accept his version of events. But what he does not know is that behind the scenes, Toni's family has been quietly cooperating with investigators. They have been gathering information, documenting his behavior, and searching for answers, not only to understand what really happened to Toni but also to protect Haley. To the outside world, Harold may appear to be a grieving father who is simply trying to protect his daughter after losing his wife. He can present himself as caring, cautious, and devoted. But for those who look deeper, the picture becomes much more disturbing. The strange behavior, the unanswered questions, the inconsistencies in his stories, the growing emotional distance between Harold and Haley. Every new detail seems to lead people back to the same terrifying possibility. Could Toni's own daughter be living with the person responsible for her mother's death? But what investigators and Toni's family do not yet realize is that Harold has been hiding another dark secret, one from his past that changes everything. A secret that makes Toni's death look less like a tragic accident and more like something that may have been carefully planned. 2 decades earlier, long before Harold ever met Toni, he was married to another woman named Lynn Rischel. Their marriage ended in tragedy on May 7, 1995, when Lynn died under mysterious circumstances. Harold claimed that the couple was driving through a remote area of Colorado, south of Denver, when Lynn was killed in a car accident. Authorities quickly accepted his explanation, and her death was officially ruled accidental. Within just 5 days, the sheriff's office concluded that Lynn Henthorn's death was simply a tragic accident. But years later, when investigators looked back at the case, they noticed something impossible to ignore. The similarities between Lynn's death and Toni's death were striking. Both women died in isolated areas of Colorado. In both cases, Harold Henthorn was the only person who witnessed what happened. And in both situations, his explanation became the foundation of the investigation. This raised a chilling question. Was Harold simply the unluckiest man alive? Someone who lost 2 wives in 2 separate, extremely unusual accidents? Or was there something far more sinister happening? Investigators began to wonder whether these deaths were connected and whether Harold had been responsible all along. Yet despite the questions surrounding Lynn's death, Harold was never seriously investigated for it. The case remained closed. But years later, with another wife dead under eerily similar circumstances, the past was suddenly impossible to ignore. To the authorities, the incident appeared to be nothing more than a heartbreaking accident, a tragic loss of life, but not a criminal act. Harold claimed that Lynn had died in a devastating head-on collision, presenting the situation as an unfortunate accident that no one could have prevented. However, the details surrounding the crash raised serious questions. Witness accounts from the time suggested that the circumstances of the accident did not match Harold's version of events. Some believed the scene may have been deliberately manipulated and that Harold's explanation was not the full truth. But despite the suspicions, investigators faced a major obstacle. There was not enough concrete evidence to prove that anything criminal had happened. Then, for years later, in 1999, Harold's life took another turn. He joined a Christian dating website, where he met and eventually connected with a woman named Toni Bertolet. When Harold first introduced himself to Toni, he carefully crafted an image of success. He portrayed himself as a wealthy businessman, a self-made entrepreneur who owned and operated his own company. To anyone looking from the outside, he appeared financially secure and accomplished. But when investigators later examined Harold's background, they uncovered a shocking reality hidden behind the carefully built image. There was no legitimate employment history. Records showed no evidence that he had earned a consistent income for more than 2 decades. The IRS had no record of substantial earnings, and investigators could not find proof of any successful business operation, despite Harold's claims. The successful life he presented to the world appeared to be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. The money Harold actually had access to came from a $650,000 life insurance payout he received after Lynn's death. And now, nearly 17 years later, history seemed to be repeating itself. After Toni's death, Harold was positioned to receive another massive insurance payout, this time worth more than $4.5 million. But the discoveries did not stop there. Investigators also learned that Harold had taken out a life insurance policy on his own daughter, Haley. If anything happened to the 7-year-old girl, Harold could potentially receive another $1 million. For Toni's family, the situation became their worst imaginable fear. They began to believe that Harold may not only have been responsible for Toni's death, but that his own daughter could now be in danger. We all felt like we were dealing with a ticking time bomb. He was a real danger. This man had already lost 2 wives under suspicious circumstances, and the last thing anyone wanted was for him to return home alone with his child. The focus immediately shifted to one person, Haley. Everybody's primary concern was Haley. Family members and investigators wanted to get Haley away from Harold as quickly as possible. They feared that if their suspicions were correct, she could become the next victim. But there was still one major problem. Despite all the disturbing details, suspicious patterns, and unanswered questions, investigators had no direct evidence linking Harold to the deaths. There was no DNA evidence. No eyewitness testimony proving murder. No single piece of evidence that could definitively show Harold killed Lynn, killed Toni, or was planning to harm Haley. The entire case was built around a disturbing pattern of coincidences, unusual behavior, financial motives, and a growing list of unanswered questions. The evidence was suspicious. The circumstances were alarming. But proving the truth would be much harder than uncovering the doubts. Investigators now had a possible motive, but a motive alone was not enough. They needed something concrete, something that could connect all the suspicious pieces and prove what really happened. Every second mattered. Meanwhile, Haley remained under Harold's complete control. She was still isolated from her mother's family, the very people who desperately wanted to protect her and give her a safe life. Harold controlled nearly every aspect of her world, her daily routine, the house she lived in, and even the people she was allowed to spend time with. If investigators wanted to remove Haley from his influence and finally hold him accountable, they needed stronger evidence. That evidence began to appear when detectives took a closer look at the events surrounding the night Toni died. One of the first major inconsistencies involved the 911 call. Harold had claimed that his phone battery was running low, forcing him to end the call. But investigators discovered something that did not match his story. After hanging up with emergency services, Harold went on to make 22 additional phone calls and sent or received 98 text messages. The question was obvious. If his battery was so low that he could not stay on the line with 911, how did he still have enough power for all those other communications? Then investigators spoke with Barry, Toni's brother. He revealed another detail that troubled him deeply. During Harold's first frantic messages after the fall, Harold had sent him Toni's vital signs. But Barry, who was an experienced cardiologist, immediately noticed something that did not add up. The condition Harold described did not match the medical reality of someone suffering the injuries he claimed Toni had. Barry explained, "The way my sister died was inconsistent with the way Harold described it. If my sister had actually bled to death, the vital signs Harold sent me did not make sense. She should have had an increased heart rate as her body was losing blood. Then, as she got closer to death, those numbers should have dropped. None of it matched what should have happened." The more investigators examined the case, the more questions appeared. Then they discovered another crucial piece of evidence near Toni's body, a digital camera. According to Harold's version of events, Toni had been holding the camera when she fell. But when investigators checked the device, they made a surprising discovery. The camera's SD card was still completely intact. And on that memory card were photographs taken throughout Toni and Harold's hike that day. The images seemed to show exactly what Harold had described, a loving couple enjoying a beautiful anniversary trip through the mountains. They smiled together, posed for pictures, and appeared to be having a normal, happy day. But those photos also gave investigators something they never expected, a timeline. Because the couple had taken so many pictures, detectives could track their movements throughout the hike. The images showed that at some point, Harold and Toni left the main trail and moved into a much more isolated area of the park, a location where very few hikers would normally go. Then investigators found one photograph that immediately caught their attention. In the image, Harold was standing near the edge of a cliff, holding onto a tree. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary hiking photo. But when investigators studied the location more carefully, they realized something disturbing. The area directly behind Harold was the exact same spot where Toni would later fall to her death. When investigators examined the cliff itself, they found another problem with Harold's explanation. The edge was not a simple place where someone could accidentally stumble and fall. The cliff was elevated, meaning a person would have to step over several feet of raised ground before going over the edge. One investigator explained, "The cliff was actually raised. You couldn't simply walk over it by accident. You had to step over several feet before falling. Based on our examination, Toni could not have just fallen. Our conclusion was that she had to have been pushed." But even with all these discoveries, investigators still had one final piece of evidence, something completely unexpected that would become the final blow against Harold's story. Inside Harold's vehicle, investigators uncover a crucial piece of evidence, a detailed map of the park showing the couple's planned hiking route. But what immediately catches their attention is something marked on the map. Harold had placed an X on the exact location where he claimed Toni had fallen to her death. For investigators, that discovery changes everything. The details of the case begin to come together, and a horrifying possibility emerges. Harold Henthorn was not a devastated husband mourning the loss of his wife. According to authorities, he was a calculated and dangerous man who had allegedly planned her death. And now, the biggest concern was protecting the one person still under his control, his young daughter, Haley. The FBI became involved and launched a full investigation into Harold's daily activities. Agents began monitoring his movements, studying his routines, and gathering evidence. They believed they had enough information to take action, but there was one major priority: making sure Haley was safe. Investigators knew that arresting Harold while Haley was nearby could create an unpredictable and potentially dangerous situation. "We had our surveillance team watching him for a couple of days," investigators explained. "We did not want to arrest Harold with his young daughter there and risk creating some kind of hostage situation." Then came the morning of November 6, 2014. Like any other day, Harold drove Haley to school. Nothing appeared unusual. He dropped her off, watched her walk inside, and then got back into his vehicle. But this time, he never made it home. With Haley safely away from him, law enforcement finally moved in. Agents surrounded Harold and placed him under arrest. Even in that moment, Harold appeared unable to accept what was happening. "I'm Harold Henthorn," he repeatedly said. The FBI agent responded calmly, "We know who you are. That's exactly why we're putting these handcuffs on you." More than 2 years after Toni Henthorn's death, federal authorities arrested Harold Henthorn and charged him with the first-degree murder of his wife. But for Haley, the news would be devastating. At only 9 years old, she was about to discover that the person she trusted most, her own father, had been accused of killing her mother. Her entire world was about to change forever. "I remember the day he got arrested," Haley later recalled. "I was called down to the principal's office. My principal told me that my father had been arrested. I just remember feeling so cold and detached because I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know what was going to happen to me." At first, Haley couldn't believe it. She thought there had to be some kind of mistake. "My father would never do that," she believed. But the painful reality was beginning to unfold. In one moment, Haley had lost her mother. And now, she was losing her father as well. As she struggled to understand her new life, Harold's case moved through the legal system. Haley was temporarily placed in the care of family friends while authorities prepared for trial. Then, in September 2015, nearly 3 years after Toni's death, Harold Henthorn's murder trial began. The case had captured national attention. Prosecutors argued that this was not a tragic hiking accident, but a carefully planned murder, a husband accused of pushing his wife to her death in order to collect millions of dollars from her life insurance policies. The courtroom would soon reveal the evidence behind one of the most shocking cases the public had ever seen. The family of Harold's first wife, Lynn, eventually joins the Bertolet family in the courtroom, standing together in the fight for justice. Although investigators never had enough evidence to formally charge Harold for Lynn's death, her family knew that sharing their story and providing their testimony could play a crucial role in helping prosecutors reveal Harold's pattern of behavior. Despite the enormous challenges and the uncertainty surrounding the case, the jury listened carefully to the evidence and believed the family's accounts. The Rischels and the Bertolets finally achieved what they had fought for, holding Harold Henthorn accountable. On September 21, 2015, Harold was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For everyone who had spent years searching for answers, it was a powerful moment. It was about getting justice for Toni, protecting Haley's future, and finally ending the control Harold had over their lives. After the verdict, one of the most emotional moments came when Toni Henthorn's mother shared a heartfelt exchange with a juror. The juror looked at her and said, "As one mother to another, I feel your pain." In that simple moment, there was a shared understanding of the unimaginable loss Toni's family had endured. With the trial finally over and Harold behind bars, there was only one final chapter left to complete. On December 23, just 2 days before Christmas, Barry Bertolet and his wife Paula received the greatest gift they could have ever hoped for. The court officially approved Haley's adoption. After years of uncertainty, fear, and fighting to protect her, Haley now had a permanent home with the family who had never stopped standing by her side. On Christmas Eve, we got Haley. "That was the best Christmas present we could ever receive," Barry said. "As her big brother, I couldn't be there to protect my sister when I should have been, but now I'm here to protect her daughter." For Haley, the Bertolets were no longer just the people who helped save her. They had become her family. They gave her the love, safety, and belonging that she had been searching for. "At that point, I felt like they were my family," Haley said. "I felt like I truly belonged with them." Toni's memory continues to live on through the people who loved her and through the Toni Jill Bertolet Endowment created by the Bertolet family. The foundation helps support aspiring medical students, allowing others to continue the path of service and compassion that Toni began during her own life. Her legacy continues to make a difference in the world. For Haley, honoring her mother means choosing to live fully and refusing to let the pain of her past define her future. She carries Toni's memory with her while working every day to heal from the trauma she experienced. "When I look at pictures of my mom and pictures of myself now, I feel like I look so much like her," Haley shared. "And I think choosing every day to forgive Harold for what he did, not for him, but for me, is how I free myself from him, from his control. It allows me to know that I am my own person." Becoming the person she is today was not easy. Haley had to survive something unimaginable in order to discover her own strength. "My story is similar to what happens to so many people," she said. "And I want them to know that no matter what they've been through, there is always a way out of the darkness." Her journey is a reminder that even after unimaginable tragedy, healing is possible, And a person's past does not have to decide their future. Sometimes the darkest chapters of our lives are the ones that reveal the strength we never knew we had. The story of Hailey Bertolet is not only about a crime. It is about courage. It is about a family that refused to ignore the warning signs. It is about a child who lost everything but still found a way to survive. And perhaps the biggest lesson is this: never judge a person only by the image they show the world. Because sometimes, behind the perfect smile, can be a story no one ever imagined. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes that truth and justice always matter.